Tonight, we journey into the story of the French Empire. You drift above a land shaped by rivers that shine under moonlight, the Seine seeking a gray sea, the Loire sliding past chalk cliffs and vineyards, the Rhone easing down from alpine ice into fields. Hillforts keep their watch over valleys where mist holds to beech and oak. Long before banners and anthems, the earth breathes with winter fog along simple tracks that will harden into Roman roads, and the quiet pulse of the land whispers that empires begin as footpaths and habits. You move with early footsteps that carry Latin speech into Celtic groves. A timber palisade rises at a ford. Across the water, a settlement dresses itself in brick and tile. Markets hum with copper bracelets and dyed wool. Amphorae come inland with oil and wine. A stone forum waits for guilds and magistrates to trade promises in a language that travels farther than the day's sun. The air tastes of wood smoke and iron, a mingled scent that belongs both to old tribes and to new rules settling like steady rain. You hear horns that curl like boar tusks and the ringing cry of a Bronze War trumpet. On a rocky plateau, the ground shivers as ranks lock shields and lift spears. Alesia becomes a circle of ditches, ramparts, and watchtowers as an army builds walls around an army. A leader in a scarlet cloak holds a tightening line while torches hiss in wind. A Gaulish king rides out and lowers his standard. The night that follows feels thin and endless. The surrender in the year 52 before the turning of the era becomes a hinge that binds Gaul to Rome, a decision that sets a path France will still feel in its bones. You walk into Lugdunum, later called Lyon, where two rivers meet and a governor's house watches the confluence. Workshops hammer out pins and votive plates. Scribes copy letters on wax and papyrus. Merchants count coins whose profiles flash in lamplight. A temple rises on a hill with columns like white trees. In its courtyard, a traveler ties a prayer ribbon to laurel branches, and in a shadowed niche an older wooden idol keeps its place, dark and patient, as if the ground itself remembers deeper tunes. You linger beside a road so carefully laid that rain finds its path and slips away without complaint. A milestone shows the distance to Narbo and Massilia. Under the carved numerals, a small spiral appears, scratched by some passing hand. It belongs to fireside stories and winter songs. A mule's harness jingles. A cart creaks. A child counts steps between stones and turns the road into a gentle game that will become memory long after the stones grow warm with morning. You listen as a priest of Mercury blesses trade at a crossroads shrine. A smith lays a bronze torque on the altar, bright as a coiled sun. The offering rests beside a Roman coin and a carved wooden boar. The shrine gathers both worlds without quarrel. When the moon touches coin and torque together, a calm thought takes root. Here the empire grows by habit as much as by sword, through bread measured at dawn, through warmth shared each evening, through time divided by bells that agree with the body. You sense a classroom where a master draws letters with a reed pen while students trace shapes on wax tablets. On the wall, a map hangs with dots for coastal towns and thin lines for roads that feel like veins. The teacher names the months with a new calendar rhythm. Outside, a hawker calls loaves scented with anise and honey. In the corner, a boy guards a small amulet for the thunder in the sky and slips it into a sleeve when the lesson begins, promising both the old powers and the new law that he will grow straight. You enter a grove that once belonged to druids. Trees hold stillness like breath. Stones keep an unbroken ring beneath slow leaves. At the center, where rites once braided the seasons, a thought refuses to close. The old keepers left few words, perhaps by rule, perhaps by choice, and their chants slide away like water through open hands. A golden sickle gleams inside a buried memory. The shape of their melodies remains out of reach, and the gap itself becomes a quiet part of the forest. You step along the docks at Narbo where barrels roll toward ships and sailors trade news of storms and safe harbors. A centurion checks cargo with a gaze that values order over fear. Inland, Aqueduct arches carry water toward fields where grapes deepen and olives twist in wind. In a villa courtyard, the smell of orange leaves drifts under tile eaves. A household shrine gathers little terracotta figures beside a smoking lamp, and the house breathes as if the lamp were a small heart. You feel unrest when taxes press hard after a failed harvest. Rumor travels along tavern benches and down caravan lines. Grain ships reach the port and the rumor weakens, though not completely. Between loyalty and weariness, hearts move like a tide that never stops returning. The rulers answer with counts of people and stores, with roads kept passable, with law extended in the name of belonging. The answer cannot mend each wound, yet it is strong enough to hold another season together. You pass a bathhouse where warm water laps at mosaic fish that wink in candlelight. Voices drift through a high room, soften in a library where scrolls line cedar shelves, then enter a basilica where a magistrate's rod touches stone. A farmer asks for a boundary to be set. A surveyor unrolls a cord across soil that remembers older feet. The mark is simple and final, a thread of decision laid on ground that will outlive every name spoken inside the hall. You kneel in a field at dusk and find a shard of painted pottery half buried in loam. The curve fits your palm, smooth from weather and time. You imagine the bowl it once made whole, the plain meal it held, the laughter, the silence, the last careless slip. You set the shard back and let the dirt close gently around it. The gesture honors how lives pass into earth and how earth returns as harvest and shelter for those who come next. You might struggle to endure what they once lived through. You rise again and look across Gaul while the first foundation settles. Roads knit provinces to rivers and rivers to ports. Latin takes root without erasing the speech of fields. The eagle standard glows above cohorts that guard mountain passes, and a carved boar keeps watch on a village gate. A cord sets boundaries with cords and stakes while a sacred grove holds its last circle of hush. Somewhere a carnix leans against a wall, its bell shaped like an open beast, its voice remembered more by story than by sound. The earliest layer of empire rests on the land like evening dew, quiet and enduring. You move north through damp fields where winter clings to reed and willow. Wooden halls breathe with hearth smoke. Bronze brooches pin wool at shoulders and iron spearheads rest along rafters. Stories gather in the evening about a young war leader who keeps counsel beneath a boar standard and listens more than he speaks. The sound of the land tightens as if it waits for a single turn that will draw new lines across old soil. You stand near a river crossing while mounted scouts return with word of shields painted in a foreign pattern. The air grows thin with frost. Warriors rub tallow into leather and bind their hair with narrow cords. A chieftain named Clovis tests the grip of his sword and studies the far bank. A messenger from his queen brings a quiet certainty that belongs to churches and letters. Clothild speaks of a faith that holds the world together through shared bread and a single cup. Her voice warms the hall like a small steady fire that keeps watch through the longest night. You walk inside a timber church where Latin syllables flow like water along stone. A bishop named Remigius reads from a book with wide margins and red initials that open like small doors. Near the altar, a carved casket guards an anointing flask. A gentle tale settles around that vessel as years pass, a tale of holy oil brought in bright light. The oil stands ready beside a bronze basin. The scent of beeswax and damp earth gathers in the chapel like patient weather, and a low chant ties breath to breath. You press toward a battlefield where ground buckles with hoofprints. The cry of the Alemanni loops over marsh and ridge. The ranks of the Franks hold a long breath. The clash begins as a gray roar that rolls without edge. You watch Clovis steady the center and send a chosen band along the reed beds to catch the flank. The turn comes suddenly like ice breaking free. The enemy line shivers and slides toward low hills. A vow tightens inside his chest as victory settles. If this day holds, he will enter the water and rise with a new name on his spirit. You enter Reims, a town that gathers around the bones of an older empire. Porticos stand with their columns, chipped yet upright. Trumpets rise and then soften for prayer. In the baptistry, a dark pool keeps its calm. Lamps draw warm halos on water. Clovis descends step by careful step, and the water folds around him like linen. When he rises, oil traces a path across his brow and a blessing gives shape to air. The late years of the 5th century cradle the moment. Letters from that age do not rest on one date with final weight, and some place the right at a winter feast while others lean toward another season. The uncertainty remains gentle, like mist that leaves the fields and then returns before dawn. You feel how quickly the choice works like yeast in deep dough. The Gallo-Roman nobility, trained in rhetoric and numbers, recognizes its future within this alliance. Bishops bring archives, roads between cathedrals, and a language that moves easily across provinces. The Franks bring courage, kinship, and a gift for rule that grows out of oath and feast and measured repayment. Together they write a quiet order across a land still patched with villages, ruins, and sacred groves that keep their circles of hush. The new thread holds because it is woven daily into custom. You hold a copy of the Salic law written in a calm hand that prefers clarity to ornament. The code lists fines for wounds measured by finger and bone. It marks property lines, protects orchards, and sets the price of a stolen pig. It keeps royal blood on the straight line of sons and refuses to let distant houses carry the throne away. The rhythm of the law sounds like a marching song that builds strength one step at a time. In markets and fields, it becomes a habit that turns anger into restitution and quarrel into reckoning. You feel the comfort that comes when justice can be named and counted. You watch a royal assembly form on open ground. Standards rise at the edges, stitched with animals and tight knots. The long-haired kings sit with elders while envoys of towns present tablets and amber. The hair is not decoration. It is a living sign of a charge received and a bond kept. It can be cut as punishment and as a closing of a door. The custom settles into the air like smoke and leaves a memory that later ages will translate into crowns, seals, and formal gestures taught to every child who learns respect. You visit a burial chamber near Tournai where a cloak pin gleams among garnets and gold bees. The bees catch low light as if they stir even in death. The room holds a hush that belongs to endings and beginnings at once. This treasure whispers of a realm that wishes to grow in ordered swarms rather than in random storms. You sense how the emblem will travel forward across centuries and return when a later court reaches back for ancient roots to steady a modern claim. Symbols endure when they speak to duty and work. You follow riders along the Rhine frontier where watchtowers turn fire into speech. Settlers fold into empty villas and plow fields near toppled statues. Old veterans teach recruits how to read the ground for tracks and how to notch a tree without killing it. The border does not keep peace by itself. It breathes with patrols, treaties, and the exchange of hostages who learn the words of two firesides. Winter grants a truce that seldom lasts. Spring makes each road a test and every ford a decision. The craft of keeping order becomes a way of life. You pause in a chapel where a new chant rises. The melody moves in a narrow line that lifts without leaving comfort behind. A girl names her son for a saint and lights a small candle that smells faintly of honey. A boy knots a wooden cross into his belt beside a knife of worked iron. In small houses you hear a prayer that keeps the names of ancestors close to the names of apostles, a braid that grows stronger each time it is spoken at dusk. Faith settles into habit more than blaze, and habit holds through hard seasons. You listen at the edge of an older story that wishes to stand beside the new one. The field that turned the tide may not have matched the songs of later tongues. The vow may have formed at a bedside rather than under spear shadow. A queen's careful counsel may have guided the path more than any bright sign in smoke and noise. The letters that survive do not agree in every line, and the gaps let cool air pass through the tale. The uncertainty does not empty the meaning. It gives the choice a human measure and lets the change belong also to quiet rooms. You take your place in a council hall where Roman tiles still pattern the floor beneath woven mats. A case is argued about a boundary stone pushed a hand's width in the night. Witnesses speak in Latin first and then in the local tongue so that no sound is lost. A judgment is given and recorded, and the stone is reset with feet pressed firm around it. The work is plain and without glory, yet the realm grows here as surely as in battle, through measures that allow bread to bake and infants to sleep without fear. You hear gratitude in the lull of voices as the hall empties. You turn east toward cold forests where other peoples keep a creed that names Christ yet understands his nature in another way. Churchmen send careful letters to explain the choice made in Reims. Gifts move along the roads. Hostility softens and hardens in cycles that follow drought and harvest. The decision to stand with Catholic belief does more than settle prayer. It opens doors to alliances and closes others, shaping the path that later kings will find beneath their feet and within their ledgers. You stand at the threshold of a new century while bells count the evening over fields first cut by Roman plows and now sown by Frankish hands. Children chase one another through threshing yards with the last light in their hair. Monks wash ink from their fingers and close the covers of books. A soldier oils his spear and hangs it where it will be ready by moonrise. The land carries Latin words and Germanic names together, and the two feel less like rivals and more like partners who share bread at the same table. In this settled rhythm, the empire to come learns how to breathe. You feel winter gather around a city of marble and smoke. The bells of Rome move the morning and call breath into order. You walk beneath arches and along mosaics that glitter like frost. The air carries incense and the clean bite of cold stone warmed by bodies standing close. You enter a basilica where the nave opens like a slow river of light. You listen to a chant that climbs and rests as if each note learns the rhythm of patience. A tall figure enters with measured steps. He is Charles, whom many will call the Great. A bishop lifts a book with covers of worked metal. Clear and rounded letters fill the page. That calm hand travels through cloisters and courts and gives the world a script that lets thought breathe. The year turns on a single day. It is the feast that keeps the birth of Christ. The sun outside lies pale and low. Inside, lamps give a honeyed glow. The Pope sets a crown on the ruler's head and a shout runs through the nave like a breath held too long. The title of emperor returns to the West. The year is 800, and the moment draws centuries into one still flame. You ride north with the new Augustus while the air stays sharp and clean. His court gathers at Aachen where hot springs steam in the morning. A chapel rises with an octagon at its heart. Marble columns rescued from an older city stand again beneath a quiet dome. Floors shine with inlaid stone. A golden figure watches from the apse. Water laps beside the baths while clerks read letters aloud. You visit the schools that grow beside the palace and the monasteries that spread across the realm. A teacher from York guides lessons with clarity and patience. Children of nobles learn, and sons of humbler houses learn as well, to serve as clergy and as scribes. Psalms set a slow beat for memory. Grammar gives order to thought. In scriptoria, hands copy gospels and laws by lamplight. You enter a hall where a table holds wax tablets, lead seals, and a chest for royal orders. Messengers receive packets tied with cord. Two trusted envoys set out to ride circuit across counties and marches. They listen to complaints, inspect weights, and ask how judges balance oath with proof. Their presence steadies the realm. Decrees guide courts, coinage, bridges, and roads. Estates must prune orchards and keep hives. You stand beside a frontier where a river runs cold and fast. The king has fought long against Saxons who hold to old ways with fierce pride. A wooden idol lies fallen by a new chapel on the bank. The war drags through years and more than one oath breaks under pressure. You feel the cost in villages that do not hear children laughing at dusk. Baptisms follow victories. Resistance returns when winter weakens watchfulness. You look across the Alps toward the plain of the Lombards. Iron rings and royal seals travel with envoys who speak of marriage, alliance, and repair. The emperor judges quarrels among dukes and tries to set one measured custom across many tongues. Letters speak of renewal rather than novelty. The promise gives people a pattern. Fields can be sown with confidence. Markets lift shutters at dawn with a steadier hand. You listen as the court keeps time with prayer. Horns meet the day at dawn, at noon, and at evening. Clergy and layfolk share psalms that roll like slow surf across stone. On feast days the chapel fills with color. A gospel book gleams with gold leaf. Children watch a thurible swing and see thin smoke rise in cold air. In this rhythm the ruler links sword to law and harvest to justice. You pass into a chamber where maps lie open with small weights at their corners. The emperor's finger rests on river mouths, mountain passes, and cities that keep keys to trade and defense. He speaks of bridgeheads, fair tolls, and the safety of pilgrims on roads to shrines. He looks for balance that holds. The weight of rule settles more in councils and records than in sudden bursts of glory. You move through a meadow where riders practice turns with shields raised. The court watches with calm pride. A boy falls and rises with a grin that shows he will try again until his seat holds steady. A craftsman presents a sword with a fuller that keeps strength without heaviness. The weapon feels alive in the hand, and yet it belongs to peace when it hangs by a door while children sleep. You sit with scholars who compare a poem about kings with a sermon on charity and with a rule that sets hours for labor and prayer. The talk shapes the way scribes write and the manner in which judges listen. Learning stands beside authority like a trusted friend. A ruler who reads gains a stillness that guides decisions when words rise and clamors pull at the edge of attention. You return to Rome in thought and feel a soft question that will not lie down. Some who stood near the altar on that winter day remember that the emperor seemed surprised when the crown touched his hair. Others speak of a nod given the night before in a room where candles burned low. Memory does not agree with itself. The shared moment keeps both priest and king within the same circle of light. You watch years pass into age. The emperor plans for his sons and for a realm too large to sit easily on a single pair of shoulders. An early division set on parchment gives way to another when misfortune takes an heir. The neat map bends and splits under the strain of blood and pride. Grandsons argue and their lines harden into borders that later centuries will learn by heart. You stand once more in the chapel at Aachen. The octagon holds its calm like a winter pond at dusk. You place your palm on a column that once stood under a different sky. The stone is cool and smooth. A low murmur of prayer drifts from a side room. The empire of this ruler does not endure as one shape on a map. It endures as ways to live. Clear letters on a page. Schools where children think with grace. Laws that choose measure over rage. You leave the warm springs of Aachen behind in thought and feel a quieter current take you west toward fields that gather around a small crown. The land between Seine and Oise keeps orchards, mills, and villages that speak in low voices. A narrow domain sits at the center like a careful knot. Castles watch crossroads. Monasteries rise where rivers turn. The power here does not strike like lightning. It moves like thread passing through cloth, one calm stroke, then another. You stand among magnates and bishops who meet to choose a king. The air tastes of wet wool and candle smoke. A name lifts above the others and finds assent. The year is 987. Hugh Capet receives an anointing that joins oil to memory, and you sense how the gesture reaches back to older vows and forward to claims not yet born. The crown fits a head that must learn patience. The realm that follows will grow through marriages, alliances, and the slow pulling of tangled cords into order. You walk to Saint Denis where kings sleep under stone that breathes a pale light. A banner of deep color hangs near the altar and waits for war, yet the abbey's real work feels like record and prayer. Monks keep charters safe in chests bound with iron. Scribes smooth vellum until it shines. Wax seals cool with images of lilies and seated rulers. The room smells of ink, bees, and old oak. From here, memory gains bones. From here, acclaim can last longer than a shout. You watch a boy king sit beside his father while a choir sings at a feast day. The elder teaches with gesture more than speech. Bread is broken, gifts are measured, and loyal men receive offices that tie them to roads and markets. The son is crowned in his father's lifetime and the habit grows sturdy. The practice turns a fragile election into a line that holds. The idea of continuity becomes a comfort that spreads outward from the royal hearth like heat that reaches every bench near the fire. You wander the towns of the Ile and find prévôts counting rents and keeping watch over weights and measures. Market bells set the rhythm. Fishmongers wash stone tables at dawn. Dyers stir vats that smell of alum. A clerk notes how tolls fall due at the bridge. The king's presence is rarely loud in these places, yet it rests in ledgers and in hands that hold the same standard pound from one parish to the next. Order arrives in the shape of habit, and habit keeps fear from settling in with the dust. You meet a priest who serves both parish and royal court. He lifts a page and shows a new seal with lilies shaped in a way that pleases the eye and steadies the heart. The emblem carries many possible births. It could echo a real flower that opens in fields after rain. It could trace a spearhead. It could reflect the shape of a river mouth. No single origin stands alone with final weight, and the sign gains power from the very silence that surrounds its first meaning. It blooms on banners and coins. It climbs into windows of colored glass. You step through the hall of Louis, who grows stout from good food and heavy work. He rides out against lords who build unlawful towers and tax travelers beyond right. The king sits in the open while villagers bring complaints. A mill restored to common use feels like a small song. You hear the contented sound of water as the wheel turns once more. Peace grows one field at a time, and a realm that no longer bleeds so often can learn to read and plant with clearer minds. You spend an evening with Sugar, a careful counselor who measures gold and thought in equal parts. He loves beauty that lifts the soul without burdening the poor. He keeps accounts with clean lines and praises a ruler who guards roads, punishes theft, and honors the altar that holds the realm's memory. In the wide choir that he envisions, light falls like warm rain and teaches the heart that order can glow. The vision rests now as a sketch and a prayer. Soon it will touch stone. You travel with a young king named Louis who marries a duchess whose lands run to the great western sea. Her mind shines with quickness, her retinue brings music and stories from warm courts, and her presence changes the air of Paris with a scent of myrtle and salt. The union does not find rest. It ends without the children needed for comfort in an age that longs for heirs. The lady returns to her own roads and chooses a new husband whose realm stretches in a wide sweep from channel to ocean and south to rugged hills. The loss turns sharp. You feel how a choice made in a quiet chamber can tilt maps for a century. You walk under the new walls of Paris, stout and damp, and pass a fresh tower near the river that guards a western gate. Stone cut yesterday carries the chill of the quarry. Men haul lime and sand. The city gathers itself like a fist that does not seek a blow yet refuses surprise. In the markets you hear songs that blend old tongues with newer words from merchants who come by water. The smell of roasted chestnuts and tallow lamps drifts above the crowd. Paris grows into a heart that beats at a steady pace. You follow a convoy of wine carts toward a fair where tolls are counted under strict rules. The fair has its own peace that lasts through the season. Disputes are heard on the spot. Cloth from distant looms hangs in clean folds. Spices breathe warmth from small jars. Coins change hands with the calm sound of metal on wood. In such places the crown's promise becomes touchable. A trader treats the road like an old friend. You pause again at Saint Denis before a glass lamp that burns with a mild flame. A vial of sacred oil rests in a reliquary nearby, bound to a tale that links present kings to a baptism long ago. The story gathers soft light even while the path by which the oil reached this place remains partly veiled. The veil does not weaken the rite. You sense how a nation loves a thread that ties harvest and sword to a grace that comes from beyond human skill. The mystery nourishes loyalty because it speaks to hope. You ride south across limestone hills where a different fire begins to spread. A preaching voice calls for correction and claims a return to an early purity. Towns listen with divided hearts. Local lords weigh duty against kinship. You see how belief can pull a realm in two directions at once. The crown answers with pilgrimage and iron and with courts that offer terms to those who return to common ground. The first steps feel uncertain. This story will take clearer shape later when kings grow surer of their reach. You stand beside a clerk who drafts a letter for the ruler who will come to be called Augustus. He asks for reports from distant bailiwicks and writes lists that turn courage into policy. The language is plain and the purpose firm. The pages will travel along roads guarded by bridges and ferries that answer to royal agents. The chain grows link by link without clamor. The ambition that fills the room feels larger than a single life and yet patient enough to live inside 1 year at a time. You end the day near the river while the towers of Paris deepen into blue. Bells carry the hour across water. Laundry on lines by the quay gives off the clean scent of lye. A baker closes his shutters. A scholar blows out a candle and leaves a page half full of neat lines. The threads have tightened without snapping. The crown rests on heads that learn caution early and trust time. You feel the loom at work and know that the next pattern will take bolder color when a resolute hand gathers Normandy and turns the tide of a long rivalry. The cloth is ready for that pull, and the night settles gently over a city that has learned how to wait. You enter a choir that glows like a lantern at dawn. Stone rises in thin bundles that open like lilies. Arches point toward a height that feels merciful rather than proud. Colored glass softens winter light until it becomes warm rain. The year is 1144, and the new east end of Saint Denis receives its consecration. Incense moves in the air. The chant is low and even. A steward counts candles while a gold vessel rests on the altar. The moment feels like the first clear breath after a long climb. Craft, order, and devotion join hands and promise a kinder way to build. You pass from that shrine into a city that grows by patience. Quarries give up pale blocks that smell of wet lime. Barges carry them along the Seine to an island where a new nave takes shape. Notre Dame lays her first stones while masons mark ashlar with quiet signs. A master lifts a plumb line and nods. The bell sheet waits for a day when a foundry will pour molten bronze that leaps like river light. The future cathedral and the older abbey speak to each other across water and road. Both teach that light can be law for the eye and balm for the heart. You walk beneath scaffolds where the pick of a mason taps a steady beat. A carver shapes a capital with vines that hold small birds. A glazier fits a petal of deep blue into a rose like a drop of evening held in the hand. The recipe that gives the color its depth will fade from common reach. Sand and ash and metal leave their secret in the glass and the secret keeps its calm. You look through that blue and feel time slow as if each breath were counted on a rosary of light. You move into a hall where scholars open books under clean windows. The schools join into a university. Masters of logic and theology share streets with sellers of bread and pears. Young men arrive from far fields and learn to argue without anger. The book of sentences sits like a sturdy table for minds. The words leave the room and begin to color courts, markets, and the conscience of rulers who wish to be more than strong. You turn toward a fortress rising beside the river. A tower at the western edge of Paris takes form while a new wall bends to the curve of the water. The king builds for safety and for memory. Chests of charters sit under guard after a hard loss on forest roads made officials wiser about their own records. Rolls of parchment breathe like sleeping animals. Seals cool on clean trays. The realm learns that to endure is to keep careful lists, to weigh words, to mark borders with cords rather than only with steel. You ride north with messengers who carry orders tied with plain string. Bailies and prévôts hear cases in market towns, check weights, and repair bridges. A man pays a fine for cutting a tree too near the river bend. A woman receives protection for a stall that sells spice and wool. The law stops short of perfection yet reaches farther each year. You sense how this steady work turns power into service and lets families plan the next season with calmer hearts. You reach Rouen and feel a change in the air. The year is 1204. A flag with lilies climbs a tower while the keys of a great duchy enter the royal hand. The river runs full and gray under stone arches as if it carries yesterday away and brings steadiness in return. The long rivalry across the channel tilts toward the crown that learns to knit rivers, roads, and men into one care. You stand on a summer field while helmets shine like beetle wings. It is 1214 and the day is bovines. Heat presses on grass and armor. The ground trembles under the slow push of ranks. The king holds the line at the center and then gathers a final pull that loosens the knot of the foe. A standard falls and the sound that rises from the field feels like a low tide becoming slack water. The breath of the realm lengthens. The victory does not end all trouble, yet it gives the crown a confidence that turns plans into policy. You visit fairs where a special piece holds for the length of the season. Cloth lies in clean folds. Iron tools ring true against test stones. Spices warm the air near booths where chestnuts roast. A clerk writes the terms of a bargain on wax. Disputes resolve without blood. In such places the law that travels from Paris becomes more than a thought. It becomes a hand that keeps honest measure and lets strangers trust one another for a week at a time. You step into Chartres after fire has scarred the town and left the faithful waiting in grief. The rebuild begins with a love that does not falter. New vaults rise. Flying supports take the push of stone and feed it into the ground like roots that know how to drink. In the nave a wide pattern curls on the floor. The path coils and returns, then reaches the center and rests. Some walk it as a journey when roads to holy places are closed. Some use it to quiet the heart. The design keeps its silence and accepts many steps. You enter a chapel rich with crimson and gold where a crystal vessel holds a thorn that came by sea and road. The ruler who will be remembered for fairness lifts his eyes toward the small crown of wood and builds a house for light to honor it. When Sainte-Chapelle opens, glass turns walls into a garden of color. The relic sits within the glow and asks for life lived with measure and mercy. Letters that follow the relic's travels are detailed and careful, yet a few spaces in the path remain in shadow. The shadow adds humility to devotion and lets reverence breathe rather than tighten. You sit with a notary who writes a treaty that draws a clean line on a map and stills one quarrel so that farmers may harvest without fear of riders in the night. It is 1259. The ink dries. The document folds and finds its chest. The promise holds long enough to teach a habit of settlement. The habit makes the next agreement easier to imagine. The realm learns that strength grows when victories know how to rest. You climb to a gallery and look down into a nave filled with people who follow the daylight as it turns across the floor. The rose lifts its seasons before them. Blue gathers like evening. Red catches like a small fire. Yellow rests like straw in a manger. Stone breathes around them without weight. You feel how this art teaches patience to those who cannot read a book and also to those whose shelves are full. The lesson returns each morning and never grows tired. You listen to builders talk of where the pointed arch first learned how to carry grace with strength. Some speak of warm lands to the south where similar forms stood under another sun. Others say the shape springs from the logic of the weight itself and the search for more light. No single tale takes the whole field. The unresolved edges let different paths of skill honor one another and keep respect between workshops that rarely meet. You end in evening light beside the river. Paris hums with carts, bells, and the low talk of students drifting from taverns to rented rooms. The walls hold, the tower keeps watch, and the bridges carry feet toward lamp glow and bread. The realm has learned to steady itself with learning, justice, and buildings that raise the eye without hardening the heart. In this gentle lift of stone and custom, the next century will find courage enough to face winds that arrive with iron rain. The night closes softly as the last notes from a choir fade into the water. You wake to the linen smell of tents in wet fields and the slow creak of wagons leaving ruts that fill with rain. Dawn shows hedgerows, orchards, and roads scored by iron shoes. The realm breathes in a rhythm of muster and harvest. Heralds carry messages across counties where men owe service by acre and oath. A long quarrel has lengthened into a way of life. You feel it in the mail shirts hung by cottage doors and in the quiet look of women counting sacks of grain after riders pass. You walk the coast where ships lean against wind and tide. Archers practice until their fingers harden. A bow sends a goose-feathered shaft with a sharp hiss that shears through mist. On a far meadow, a standard ripples above ranks that move like a slow tide. The meeting at Crécy writes its lesson in grass and blood. Knights who trust weight and valor learn the price of riding into a storm of arrows whose whisper becomes a wall. The air holds a smell of trampled time and spent cord. The shock does not end the struggle. It alters every morning that follows. You move along roads where plague bells once tolled. The world narrows to the space of a bed and a prayer spoken in a whisper. Fields grow green without hands to cut them. Markets reopen, thin at first, then steady. Survivors step into roles they never expected and demand wages that change the old balance. You sense how loss shapes rule as surely as victory, how law and coin must bend to grief and need. You climb a rise and watch banners turning at Poitiers. Sunken lanes and vines fold the ground into pockets where plans break apart. Prisoners of high birth ride away under careful guard. Ransom binds king and kingdom to sums counted in years. The treaty that follows promises calm with clean lines and solemn oaths. The calm proves brief. Borders answer to memory as much as ink. The lesson of patience returns to the side that gathers strength in silence. You spend an evening under a timber roof while a small man with tired eyes studies maps by rushlight. He is called the Wise and he prefers siege engines and ledgers to bright charges. Masters of stone work to pull enemy flags down from towers rather than meet lances in open light. Alongside him rides a captain from Brittany who loves the grind of hard marches more than any show. Fortresses that once flew foreign colors learn a new song. You feel a country teaching itself to win through time. You follow a company on a raid that eats by fire. Stacks of wheat fall to sparks that lift like swarms under a red sky. The tactic aims not only at barns. It aims at sleep. Villagers wake to ash where bread should be and the lesson moves as fast as rumor. The work leaves a taste of smoke that does not wash away. Out of that taste grows a resolve that will not accept endless hunger. You cross into a city with battered gates where defenders have learned to breathe in rhythm with the river. Orléans holds on winter after winter while rumor says the end draws near. You hear the wooden knock of mallets on hoardings and the clink of chains that raise a drawbridge over black water. In the square a baker cuts thin loaves and a priest keeps a lamp burning that smells faintly of honey and smoke. Hope feels like a small cup shared among many hands. You stand on a road at dusk when a band arrives with a banner that shines white. A young figure rides in armor bright as rain on stone. The cloth lifts a pair of names painted in clean letters and angels bend above them with lilies in their hands. The rider speaks in a tone that does not waver. The words are plain and carry the calm of someone who has already burned doubt in a private fire. Soldiers who have learned to guard their hearts find themselves listening like children at a winter hearth. You keep to the edge of the crowd when the newcomer greets the heir who waits for proof in a hall washed with candlelight. The tale says a sign is given that only 2 souls could know. Records speak carefully yet leave a door open for grace. Whether the token rested in a few simple words or in a memory touched just so remains hidden as if placed in a reliquary of silence. The effect is clear. A court that wrangles between hope and caution leans at last toward movement. You watch the river shine under May light while boats slip through gaps in the enemy's grip. The white banner rises above the walls. A charge runs through streets and towers as if the stones themselves release their breath. The siege loosens. Engines fall quiet. On the 8th day of that month, the city finds space to walk without fear of bolts stitching the air. Bells ring until swallows fold their flight and rest on the eaves. This is a fact that keeps warmth even when other details cool in argument. You travel north and east as towns open their gates with a careful joy. Roads lead toward Reims where old kings took oil and crown. Summer heats the wheat and a procession moves under a sky that smells of warm straw and horse. The cathedral's vault gathers the sound of a name spoken with weight at last. The anointing settles like rain on parched ground. You feel a country remember its center and the way a rite can gather scattered minds into one quiet oath. You ride again when the path bends toward danger. At Campaign, the game of gates and timing slips by a breath. The young captain is taken in a swirl of smoke and dust. Chains close with a dull tone that keeps time with a new kind of fear. Trials begin that use ink more than iron. A court assembles with men who prefer clever nets to open fields. Pages fill with questions and answers that still carry a pulse across 6 centuries. You stand in a chamber in Rouen where straw softens the floor and a small window admits a square of cold light. The prisoner speaks from a place inside that seems to hold its own lamp. The words circle dress, banner, voices, and obedience to what the heart knows. A sentence waits like a blade hung from a beam. The date fixes itself in the year when spring tightens into warmth. Ash rises into air that carries the smell of the river. The record closes with a signature of men who sleep poorly for a time and then learn to live with what they have done. You return to Orléans on an anniversary night when a candle procession steps slowly along the quay. Boats drift with their lanterns low. Children wear paper crowns and hold sprigs of lily that bend in the breeze. The story keeps a gentle tension that never quite resolves. Whether the counsel that moved the young captain belonged more to heaven or to gifts woven at birth, whether strategy shaped her success as much as fire of spirit, whether a king measured too carefully when gratitude was due. The questions keep their quiet place in the tale without shaking the truth of what changed on those bright days. You end by the walls where arrows once hummed like bees. A mason smooths new mortar across stones that carry old scars. A veteran's hand rests on the parapet with a tenderness that belongs to farewell. The empire to come learns from this long war a way to hold through pressure, to gather force in silence, to accept help when it arrives in a form no counsel would predict. Bells drift across the river in evening light. The sound spreads like calm rain over fields that will be sown again when morning returns. You pass through a doorway where incense hangs like quiet rain and the floor holds the warmth of many feet. Candles breathe along a nave while outside a square smells of salt fish and damp wool. A chorister's voice lays a psalm on the air. The melody carries steadiness across the stones and into streets where shutters open and close with quick hands. You follow the sound until another tune meets it from a different house, brisk and plain, a tune that travels from Geneva in small printed books tucked inside cloaks. 2 songs drift over the same river. 2 prayers watch the same sky for mercy. You walk along stalls where pamphlets spread like bright leaves. A printer wipes black from his fingers and smiles at a page that shows clean letters and little ornament. In a nearby booth, a vendor sells rosaries and holy water in small flasks that catch the light. The mix of smells and sounds makes a kind of morning weather. It changes quickly. A shout runs along a lane. A sermon rises in one courtyard. Bells answer in another. Men look for friends before they choose a street. Women count their children with their eyes and move toward doorways that promise a moment of shelter. You find a chapel where a priest lifts a host above a chalice while smoke from the thurible curls like silver thread. Across the river, a bare room holds benches and a table with a single book. A psalm begins in unison, shaped by verse that crowds learn by heart. The words plant courage where fear gnaws at sleep. A child in each place presses a token in a small hand, one a medal with a lily, one a folded scrap with a verse that promises refuge. These small signs tell the same truth in different tongues. A soul hungers for a road that leads home. You travel to the year when a queen's daughter weds a prince who keeps a different form of the same faith. August air warms the stone of Paris. Flags hang from windows. Music floats from strings that quiver in the heat. Dances trace graceful circles in halls where courtiers laugh and watch one another. Some eyes search for reconciliation, for a bridge that will hold. Others measure advantage with care. In a nearby lodging, a seasoned captain, trusted by those who wish for reform, studies a city that seems to open its arms. 2 days later, his body falls hard against a floor that smells of wine and iron. The wound does not finish the work. It begins another. You feel the city change as if a wind shifts and finds a new direction through streets that run like narrow rivers. A bell sounds at an hour that does not suit ordinary prayer. Torches flutter. Boots move at speed over cobbles still warm from day. Doors break against weight. Blades flash in stairwells where shadows seem alive. The feast that began with songs in cups finds a second act with no music. The small hours lengthen until morning reveals a truth that refuses to soften. A river carries silence within its current. The date fixes itself and remains. The memory keeps a pale face and a heavy breath. You step among courtyards where chalk marks still ghost on walls. Names once written there have washed away and left only a pale smear. Stories of command and consent travel by rumor and then settle into letters that never agree. Some pages speak of a plot shaped in a chamber where candles burned late. Others point toward panic and small calculations that grew suddenly large in the fear of a night that felt uncertain in every alley. The account does not close on one single cause. The sorrow holds its shape without a tidy edge. The city learns how quickly neighbors become strangers when trust becomes scarce. You leave Paris by a gate where carts roll toward provinces that carry their own burdens. Towns answer with their own seasons of siege and counter-siege. La Rochelle keeps a fierce watch on its seawalls while gunners measure powder with calm hands and set fuses with neat care. A psalm rises over water. On the ramparts, a boy listens for the chunk of a culverin and counts the seconds before the shot touches home. Far inland, a pilgrimage forms with candles and banners and a promise to repair torn cloth without tearing new seams. The promise falters and returns and falters again. You enter a council chamber where the word politique begins to carry weight. A handful of men and women grow tired of purity that burns granaries. They ask rulers to choose the common life over flawless victory. The thought moves slowly into speeches, edicts, and negotiations carried on roads wet with rain. Each parchment smells of wax and horse. Each seal carries lilies or a cross. The language seeks a way to guard both altar and hearth so that bread can rise at dawn without fear of hoofbeats at noon. You turn toward a prince from the south who rides with a white scarf over his shoulder and laughter that arrives even on hard days. He moves like a man who loves open roads more than gloved corridors. He learns fields and fords as if they were sights from childhood. Battles carry his name and taught him to trust quick turns and plain speech. One morning near Ivry, he asks his men to follow the silk that flies above him, bright and simple, so that in the smoke their eyes can find a point that does not waver. The charge flows like a river released from a dam. The ground remembers it in its own quiet way. You hear a sentence of street talk that generations repeat whenever a choice of devotion touches a duty to rule. People shape the line as a proverb and offer it with a shrug that mixes affection and wit. The original words remain uncertain. They might have been spoken in another form, or not spoken at all. The line lives because it fits the turn that follows. A crown settles most easily on a brow that enters the great churches and joins a rite that gathers towns to a single table. In the spring of a year that begins a new count, the city that once shut its gates opens them to a ceremony that steadies a shaken land. You stand beside clerks who prepare articles for a royal promise. The work is slow and careful. The royal hand writes of amnesty, of private worship in houses where a family gathers, of public chapels in certain towns, of oaths kept by officers who agree to guard subjects without asking their creed at the gate. The articles list strongholds that may hold garrisons for a time and courts that may hear cases where belief once tilted the scale. The year is 1598. The pages fold and find their boxes. The promise is an edict with a name that travels easily across maps and throats. It gives weary people the permission to live side by side with less fear. You return to a church where a choir practices a calm hymn while a mason repairs a chipped step. A woman lifts a child so that small fingers can touch holy water. Across town, a family sets a table where the bread is plain and the words are steady. The two meals speak kindly of one another in the heart that watches both. Shopkeepers reopen shutters. Soldiers repair a bridge rather than guard it. A narrow piece spreads out like linen smoothed over a bed after a night of grief. It will not remain without care. It remains long enough to teach the land the taste of normal bread. You walk through a garden near a palace where orange trees winter in glazed rooms. A ruler enjoys the scent and speaks with counselors about roads, harvest, and the time needed for a custom to become a habit. He thinks about children who deserve quiet sleep. He asks that the young learn to read and to measure grain without cheating. He carries old scars and a hope that refuses to grow thin. He knows that one act of rest can be worth more than 10 acts of fury. You pause at a roadside cross where a ribbon of black ties around the post. A set of hoofprints darkens the dust and ends in a confusion of feet near a carriage door. The scene lives in memory with an ache that never quite fades. The calm that follows has edges chipped by events that cling to the mind and stir at each retelling. Even so, the land breathes easier for a season. The breath allows harvests to return to their rhythm. The breath allows words to soften and papers to do a little of the work once asked of steel. You end beside the river at dusk. Lamps glimmer along quays where barges bump and ropes creak. A bookseller stacks volumes that bear both lilies and psalms on their title pages. A child holds a small cross in one hand and a small book in the other and feels no need to hide either. The night that once held knives now keeps quieter stories. The realm learns how faith and rule might live in the same house without setting fire to the table. The lesson is not complete. It is enough for sleep to return to many rooms that had forgotten the sound of steady breath. You drift through a palace that smells of beeswax and orange leaves resting in their winter tubs. Morning pours across polished floors. Mirrors gather the light and send it back in long rivers that glide along gold frames and painted ceilings where Apollo rides a quiet sky. Courtiers move like a tide set by bells and by the measured steps of a king who prefers clarity to surprise. You fall into the rhythm of bows, gloved hands, and the soft scrape of shoes along parquet that seems to store sunlight for leaner days. You walk the gardens where gravel paths draw straight lines toward the horizon. Fountains lift silver threads and let them fall with a sound that soothes the ear. Hedges keep to geometry as if the earth wished to imitate reason. In a distant grove, a small stage waits for laughter and song. The air tastes of boxwood and damp stone. From this center, the realm learns a lesson about order and display. Power dresses itself in light and invites the world to read its message. You enter the long hall where new mirrors rise panel by panel. Glass takes a smooth skin of metal and becomes a lake that never ripples. Chandeliers appear again and again until brightness turns into ceremony. The hall completes its shine within these years and teaches visitors that majesty can be built like music, note by clear note. The craft once guarded by other shores now learns a home in these rooms, and the success tastes like fresh water drawn from a sealed well. You pass into an office where a minister opens ledgers that smell of ink and salt. Pages list ships, masts, rope, and barrels of biscuit. Ports hum at Brest, Rochefort, and Toulon. Ropewalks run the length of fields. Tar warms on braziers. Keels slide into cold water and crews cheer as if seeing a child stand for the first time. In the north, corsairs study the wind with tireless eyes and chase enemies along gray seas. The new navy gives the crown a voice that carries beyond the surf. You follow a canal where teams pull barges that move without hurry. Locks whisper as they lift and lower the world by careful hand. A long water road opens between river and sea and gives merchants a calmer path than storms will allow. Villages along that line learn the taste of distant wares. The project leaves a thread of pride in places that remember fields turned into passageway. Coasts feel joined as if a seam that once hung open had closed with neat stitches. You step into arsenals where carpenters swing adzes and the scent of oak curls around you like warm smoke. Cannon lie in rows with their mouths still and dark. A quartermaster checks lists with a finger stained by soot. Far from the ports, a fortress rises with points like a star pressed into the ground. Stone and earth interlock with a sense that nothing has been left to chance. The engineer who measures these angles teaches Europe that walls can think. Towns behind those shapes sleep more deeply than before. You pass through a court where music keeps time with the day. A violin sings under a hand that holds power within grace. Dancers turn in figures that trace friendship and rivalry at once. In a nearby room, actors rehearse a comedy that teases pride without breaking the skin. A poet reads lines that cradle sorrow inside order. The language gathers polish until envoys treat it as the surest bridge between courts. Even ordinary letters begin to taste like spring water poured into crystal. You travel by ship to islands where sugar glows white in open sheds and the sun beats without mercy. Mills groan. The smell of crushed cane mixes with sweat and salt. In a governor's office, a thick book of rules lies open. The language speaks of baptism and Sundays, of rations and punishments, of family and sale. The words claim order yet carry another truth beneath them. Human life is bound in iron and counted like cargo. A royal decree on slavery fixes this world in clauses that pretend to comfort and manage while sorrow stands in the doorway and does not leave. You return to the mainland where marshes retreat before ditches cut in firm lines. Drained fields breathe a new scent that mixes mud with hope. Boots from the Low Countries tramp the banks and teach soil how to keep its edge against water. Villages rise where reeds once swayed. Cattle nose grass that lifts from ground the color of old bronze. To one eye the work looks like salvation. To another it looks like the taming of an older freedom. The land remains silent and simply yields bread. You walk corridors when ambassadors arrive under awnings that glitter in sun. Treaties are read in rooms that echo gently. Small squares on maps change color after a season of war. The air remembers bright festivals named for peace and also the dull quiet that follows a failed harvest. In bitter winters, barrels freeze in courtyards and the cry of a child carries through thin walls. Relief wagons creak across rutted ice. The crown opens granaries while clerks count more empty fields than full ones, and the realm learns how glory leans on weather it cannot command. You enter a chapel where the king prays with a composure that slows the breath of everyone nearby. Candles lift steady flames against blue silk. A confessor whispers with care. Out in the galleries, courtiers turn the key of favor by obeying small rituals that shape each hour. The machine of rank teaches obedience in gentle doses until each body moves as part of a larger will. The discipline keeps quarrels quiet and also keeps thought inside walls that press inward with concealed weight. You stand along a frontier in the east where snow lies in furrows of stone. Campaign tents sew themselves into long lines. Drums carry orders and the ground trembles beneath cannon that move on sledges. Seasons decide battles as surely as bravery. A peace follows and seems to close a gate on old arguments. Then a distant throne sits empty. Claims unfold like ripples from a stone dropped into deep water, and another generation learns the price of inheritance. The talks that finish at Utrecht leave a taste of compromise that never quite fades. You cross the Atlantic in thought and reach a river that splits the continent like a harp string. Traders paddle with a rhythm older than maps. A bold captain names a wide land for his king and buries a plate to speak to the future. The exact shore of that act shifts in retellings and sometimes turns doubtful when charts are compared. The tale still marks a step in a long reach that ties beaver pelts, folded maps, and chapel bells to a distant court where fountains bloom and cups of hot chocolate steam in marble light. You sit with scholars who count silver and men while they argue whether strict rules for trade let industry flower or close windows just when a breeze might have entered. Monopolies promise safety and also invite idleness. Tariffs raise ships and lower spirits. Tallies exist for both sides of the case and the numbers refuse a single story. Another reckoning troubles the ledgers in the same years when a royal decision on worship closes doors for families who pray in a different way. Workshops fall silent. Others fill. The measure of loss and gain will not agree, and the uncertainty lingers like mist above a canal at dawn. You end at dusk on the terrace where the last light trills along fountains and the sky deepens to violet. Courtiers step backward from the royal presence with faces that keep calm. Far away, sailors turn in hammocks and soldiers clean muskets by small fires. The empire gathers silk and gunpowder under an emblem that glows like a small sun above gates and sails. Ledgers fill with triumphs. The true cost keeps moving across the page like a shadow that never stops changing its length. You move through rooms bright with candlelight where voices rise and soften like a tide. Cups of chocolate steam on trays. Cards whisper on green felt. A hostess lifts a finger and the room listens. Ideas cross the air as gently as dust in sunlight. A philosopher speaks of law drawn from nature. A jurist answers with the balance of powers. A poet smiles and folds irony into kindness. Outside, printing presses breathe the smell of ink and oil as pages of an encyclopedia stack like smooth bricks for a house of reason. You trace a copperplate engraving where tools, looms, and furnaces turn craft into knowledge. The plate shines with tiny cuts that catch the lamp. A reader holds the book and finds courage in the thought that skill deserves honor. In another corner, a man in a long coat writes letters for friends who live under distant roofs and asks that power sit humbly before truth. A story spreads about a father wrongly accused and the slow work of justice done with clarity. Names like Voltaire and Diderot settle into the air without ceremony. The mood of the room grows practical and tender at once. You step into streets where bread sets the measure of hope. Flour makes tempers quick. A rumor passes about hidden grain. Crowds form, disperse, and form again. Clerks open ledgers that feel too thin for the debts a realm must carry. Ministers change like seasons. One prints a public account that brightens spirits and then resigns to the sound of soft applause that soon fades. Ships return from a war across the ocean carrying stories about rights that belong to people simply because they breathe. A young noble returns with a clear gaze and a name that will travel through two worlds. He brings a key for a friend far away and the metal glints with the promise of change. You enter Versailles in a spring when uniforms, gowns, and powdered wings of hair still move in measured patterns, yet the floorboards carry a new creak. The king calls for a gathering of orders that have not met together for many years. Carriages roll toward a hall where high windows pour light on rows of benches. The third estate fills with men who know towns, trade, and the price of wood in winter. Words about vote and dignity climb the walls. When negotiations harden, the deputies walk to a plain room where the floor smells of resin and chalk. They raise their hands and swear to stay together until a constitution stands firm. The gesture feels like a held breath turning into speech. You step into Paris where heat presses on stone. The crowd listens for horses and looks for drums. Anxiety turns into movement. Arsenals open with doors taken from their hinges. Cannon roll on cobbles. The gray walls of a fortress rise above a moat like a patient animal that has lost its will. After hours that stretch like wire, keys change hands and the iron heart of the city thumps with relief. The date fixes itself. Pieces of chain fall into pockets. A flag with 3 colors lifts against a pale sky and a cockade settles on hats like a small, bright promise. You walk through a night that opens into a dawn of vows. In a chamber in Paris, nobles give up privileges one by one with voices that tremble between fear and pride. Rural dues fade in the air. Tithes loosen their hold. A few weeks later, a declaration sets words about liberty and rights into lines as clean as a plumb line on fresh timber. The ink dries and becomes a mirror that shows both hope and work still ahead. Markets smile and then worry. Bread remains thin even when phrases grow full. You follow a river of women and apprentices along the road to Versailles where rain wets hair and drums keep a stubborn beat. They ask for flour and for the royal family to return to the city where hunger is seen. The palace sighs and yields. The procession home glows with lanterns that swing like low moons. The court settles behind the Tuileries walls and the city sleeps a little easier, though dreams keep the edges of iron. You enter churches where candles burn before images that have stood for centuries. A new law asks clergy to take an oath before the nation. Some do, easily. Some do, with tears. Some cannot. Altars begin to speak in different tones, both tender, both certain. In villages, the split opens along family lines. The sound of bells changes pitch from valley to valley. The Book of Hours remains beloved, and yet the town hall asks for new calendars that ignore saints and turn months into weather and light. You ride with a carriage that leaves Paris by a quiet gate in early summer. Wheels murmur on soft road. Lanterns throw small circles of yellow. Faces are hidden behind cloaks. At a post town near the border, a sharp eye notices a profile that should not pass. Doors close, riders gather, and the journey turns back toward a city that watches with a mix of pity and anger. The purpose of the flight remains a page with smudges at the edges. Prudence may have moved the decision. Fear may have guided the hand. The uncertainty never fully clears. You step into a year when drums call for volunteers. A song rises from the south, brisk and fierce, and climbs the road to the capital. Voices learn the tune as feet learn the march. War with queens and emperors sets every province in motion. A duke across the frontier writes a threat that stiffens resolve rather than softens it. The palace that once held fates fills with smoke and shouts. By evening, the old crown sits in a room that feels like a waiting place. The next dawn belongs to a republic. You feel the city hold its breath in early autumn while prisons grow crowded and rumor canters faster than reason. Knives flash where shadows are thick and candles shake in windows. The river carries a burden no words can lighten. The memory leaves rooms silent for long stretches as if all the clocks in the quarter had stopped at once. Out of silence comes a hard calm. Trials move forward under bright lamps and public sight. You stand in cold air beside a wooden platform where frost makes the boards pale. A bell tolls from a church that has kept many calendars. A man walks with a steady step and a gray face. The date is written in firm numbers and will never change. The blade shines and falls with terrible simplicity. The crowd murmurs and then fades into streets that smell of iron. The snow remembers without drama. The act closes one age and opens another at the cost of a human breath that cannot return. You enter a room where a small group studies maps and lists with a concentration that feels like prayer. Grain, saltpeter, boots, guns, bridges, horses, taxes, schools for gunners, hospitals for wounded, laws for prices. The work becomes a mountain of small measures. Armies rise that belong to the entire people. In the West, hedgerows hide fighters who cling to older patterns of altar and throne. Smoke lies low over fields sown with sorrow. In the capital, a festival blooms on a wide field where a paper mountain lifts and a choir sings to a vision of a single maker above nations. The pageantry glitters and then turns brittle in the heat of the next month. You return to the hall where deputies once swore an oath on a wooden floor. The air smells of ink and tension. Names are called. Votes move like beads on a string. A voice that once cut like glass falls silent. A cart rattles away. The blade works one more time and then the noise that followed it begins to thin. The city listens to its own heart and hears that it is tired. You end in a square where a young soldier studies artillery wheels with a mechanic's care. The tricolor climbs every mast and the red cap sits on statues like a new crown for old stone. In taverns, songs lift about liberty and about bread, about honor and about weary feet. The beginning of the storm felt like a whisper in a salon. The middle felt like thunder. The ground still trembles a little, yet the sky shows a path. The reason for the first spark and the final surge will never rest on a single shelf. Hunger, ideas, pride, and devotion all held the rope. You breathe the dusk of a decade that learned how quickly a nation can change its clothes and still wear the same face. A different kind of empire waits at the edge of the map with drums that sound like hooves across sand. You step into a barracks that smells of coal smoke and damp wool. A young artillery officer stoops over a wheel and runs a hand along the rim to feel each spoke. He loves the clean logic of angles and the way powder, line, and wind can make order from confusion. Guns speak at Toulon and the harbor changes hands in a spasm of thunder. He learns that speed and clarity can lift a career faster than lineage. His name moves from mouth to mouth until it becomes a drumbeat that shortens roads. You travel with columns that climb toward narrow passes where snow swallows hoofprints and breath turns to bright clouds. Mules tug guns over ice while leather creaks and ropes sing. On the far slope, green opens like a promise. In Italy, the ground rolls with vines and olive trees, then hardens into fields where battles end before evening and treaties are written by candlelight. You feel the lesson that follows him everywhere. That momentum itself can act like an ally when caution begins to slow the day. You enter a palace that still remembers a revolution. Marble floors carry the echo of careful steps. A treaty with Rome brings churches back to their rhythm. Bells return to calendars that had broken into unfamiliar names. Priests register births and burials with quiet hands. A concordat steadies the boundary between altar and office. The smell of wax and incense rises again without the old sharpness, and families find their way back to pews that once felt forbidden. You watch a commission set to work in a room bright with winter sun. Pages lie in ranks, neat as stitched seams. The civil code takes shape with articles that sound simple even when they carry centuries inside their lines. Property gains a fence that courts can see. Contracts learn to breathe on their own. Fathers keep authority. Wives lose rights that will be named again long after the ink dries. The voice of the law chooses clarity over flourish, and the choice holds beyond the government that sponsors it. A red ribbon appears on lapels to honor service that lifts the common good. The Legion turns gratitude into habit and gives artisans a place beside officers in public praise. You stand in Notre Dame on a day that glitters with frost outside and gold within. Tapers fill the nave with steady light. A choir steadies the breath of the crowd. Robes of velvet trail bees that shine like drops of amber. Laurel wraps a brow that prefers victory to mediation. A bishop lifts his hands. The Pope sits with a look that belongs to both prayer and careful patience. When the crown rises, the gesture belongs to the man who takes it. The moment fixes itself in a famous canvas and also in memories that never agree perfectly on the air in the room. The uncertainty keeps a small hush inside the story and lets each listener decide where authority truly rested that morning. You march east into a mist that opens like a curtain. A winter sun burns through and turns ponds to mirrors. The day at Austerlitz begins as a whisper and ends as a lesson that other generals will study. Columns slide, then pivot, and a hill becomes a key that fits a hidden lock. Prisoners fill the roads. Fires wink at dusk. In the marsh below, ice cracks in a way that later tales enlarge into a single roar. Some swear they saw regiments sink like a broken bridge. Others remember only skirmish and smoke. The field keeps its silence and the legend walks beside the fact without settling the distance between them. You feel the pull of a new design that aims to choke an island by closing its markets. Edicts spread across ports where counters smell of tar and citrus. Docks idle. Smugglers skim along shale beaches with lanterns hooded by cloth. Merchants grumble in coffeehouses and speak of goods trapped behind good intentions. The strategy touches every table and turns bread, cloth, and sugar into news. You ride south and watch a city rise in heat and dust. Madrid learns the sound of a sudden uprising. Lantern light paints walls white as bone. A square shivers under musketry that cracks the night into shards. Guerrilla bands take the hills and make roads uncertain. A war of ambush and reprisal eats months that cannot be replaced. You taste bitterness in water drawn from wells near burned farms. The army that won on fields finds itself losing time. You pause near a river that smells of poplar leaves in summer. The day at Wagram stretches under a sky that refuses wind. Guns trade answers until the air turns gray. The map bends, then flattens. Victory arrives with a weight that does not feel light. In a nursery far away, a cradle rocks in the care of a new empress, and the hope of a long dynasty steps into a room that does not belong to hope for long. You follow supply wagons toward endless birch and marsh. The calendar slips forward while distances lengthen rather than shorten. Moscow smolders with heat that carries the taste of pitch. Streets turn to corridors of cinder. The army waits for a letter that never comes, then turns back along a road already stripped to bone. Snow arrives with a tender beauty that hides iron underneath. Drums go silent because fingers cannot grip sticks. Horses sink where drifts hide ditches. A river swallows men at a crossing that no one will forget. You hear the quiet that follows an army when it has learned the cost of winter. You reach a plain near Leipzig where banners clatter like shutters in a storm. The clash turns into a weather system that lasts for days. The ground heaves under waves of feet and hooves. Allies from many tongues call orders that cross and tangle. When the smoke lifts, the way home points to a room at Fontainebleau where a ruler studies his own hands and then writes a last promise to a guard who weeps without shame. The walls of a small island close around a mind that does not know how to rest. You climb a coastal path where olives lean over bright water. A boat glides ashore and a soldier steps onto sand that gives slightly under his weight. Villagers stare, then smile, then shout. A road rises and turns. The route to Paris becomes a string of meetings where uniforms tumble toward a single hue. A king steps aside. Drums return to the capital. For 100 days the air fills with a feeling that belongs to waking from a long dream. It does not last. You stand on a ridge that smells of wet soil. Rain has worked the fields into a paste that clings to boots and slows guns. Squares of infantry hold like small fortresses. Cavalry swirl and break like surf against rocks that refuse to move. A farmhouse smokes. A ridge passes from one command to another, then back, then away for good. Evening lowers its lid and the tricolor droops as if it were tired of wind. The name of the place turns heavy and final. The road that follows runs toward a green island wrapped in cold water and long horizons. You enter a white house on a far Atlantic rock where shutters groan and ink freezes thin on winter nights. A man walks in a garden walled against wind and talks into a notebook held by a friend. He sifts memory with the calm of someone who knows every hour by heart. He assigns meaning with the same energy he once gave to movement. Outside, waves do the work of time. Inside, a myth sets its table and invites the future to sit down and eat. You end in Paris where stones remember all of it. Arches lift above avenues where uniforms once rolled like rivers. A tomb waits in a chapel where light falls in ovals on a sarcophagus a generation after the body returns across gray seas. The eagle has folded its wings, yet the code still lies open on desks. The lycées still sound with recitation. The prefect still signs papers that hold a province together, and the map of Europe still carries traces of a hand that loved order and speed. Whether the age rose because one will found the right currents or because a people needed a single figure to carry a century of desire remains a thought that never quite lies down. The night settles on a city that can still hear a distant drum and also the soft rustle of pages that outlast drums. You walk the river quays as carriages return from distant roads and the city adjusts to familiar titles spoken once more. The year after the drums fade, a charter takes its quiet place beside the throne. Clerks copy its articles with careful hands, and the paper smells of wax and linen. The king signs with a measured flourish and courtiers breathe easier. Churches mend roofs, guilds reopen halls, and a tune that once hid in low voices steps into daylight with gentler pace. White flags lift above ministries where tricolors once clung like ivy. The stone remembers both colors without prejudice and keeps them as layered dust upon a sill. You stand in the nave at Reims where vaults hold winter light like milk in a glass. A vial rests in a reliquary that survived fire and fury by the thickness of a fingernail. A rite returns with chant and oil, and a crown finds its weight again. The year is 1825. The fragrance of chrism drifts over carved lilies and settles on a brow that bows with gravity. The line back to the first baptism of kings glows like a thread that still refuses to break. The exact path that saved the fragment through storm and ruin remains partly veiled, and the veil lends the gesture a patience that touches even those who doubt. You move through streets where shutters tilt to spy on new habits. A police rider touches two fingers to the brim and passes. Printers lay type in rooms that smell of lampblack. Editorials lean toward caution then flare with courage. A theater puts a young heroine on stage and the audience bursts with pride until the door closes and the air cools. In a square, a man falls to an assassin's blade and grief darkens salons that had tried to hope for calm. The realm learns again how thin the skin of peace can be when old wounds keep their ache. You turn the pages of ordinances dated in summer ink. They restrict papers, curb assemblies, and dissolve a chamber that had learned to argue with skill rather than fury. The signatures shine like small blades and slice the city's patience in clean strips. Printers shut their doors by order and open them by conscience. Compositors wrap lead in cloth and carry letters in coat linings. Students lift benches and build the first chords of a barricade. The heat of July presses down on stone. For 3 days, Paris feels like a bell struck again and again until the sound fills every ear. The tricolor climbs windows and hats. The white flag lowers without dignity and disappears into memory. The dates are July 27 through 29 in the year 1830, and they keep their place like a nail driven through pine. You watch a citizen king swear to guard a charter that now wears stronger thread. He walks without jewels, carries a plain umbrella, and smiles with a gravity that suits a merchant boulevard more than a mirrored hall. Shopkeepers feel seen. Bankers feel understood. Caricatures shape his face into a pear that appears in every window where laughter finds a safe place. The tone of the city drops a half step. Respectable coats replace brocade. The palace becomes a large house for prudent men who prefer contracts to glory. You follow a ship toward a white coast where the sea breaks into lace over rock. A quarrel that began with an impatient gesture in a governor's room grows into a blockade that lasts like stubborn weather. The consul remembers the sting of a fly whisk. Merchants remember wheat counted in wartime ledgers. Ministers remember the need to steady a nation with a victory that feels simple and near. The reason that truly pushes the fleet to sail never fits one sentence. It lives in the mixture of wounded pride and arithmetic and the old wish of every court to look forward rather than backward. You step onto a beach called Sidi Farouche where sand squeaks under boots. The morning is June and the air smells of salt and scrub. Bluecoats climb low ridges. Cannons slide and settle. Above the city on July 5, the key turns in a great door and Algiers lowers its guard. The sound of hooves rattles the Casbah. A tricolor climbs a wall where the call to prayer still floats at the hour like a silver ribbon. The date fixes itself, and a new chapter takes root where fig trees cling to dust and terraces flood with light. You walk markets where copper bowls catch sun and coffee drifts like a hymn from open doorways. Women in white veils move with the quiet of water. A soldier buys dates and keeps the pits as a lucky count. Officers step into cool courtyards and taste mint on their tongues. In the hills beyond the city, a rider gathers tribes and gives shape to a state born from covenant and prayer. His voice is calm, his hands are clean, and his banner carries verses that steadied his first thoughts by firelight. He is recognized for a season by treaty and then pushed again to the edges. He learns to make the land itself his ally, and the valleys answer when he calls. You follow columns along wadis where reeds whisper. Skirmishes spark at dawn and fade at noon. A general studies the curve of ravines and turns lessons of plow and embankment into tactics that grind rather than blaze. Villages burn, folds of rock trap families in fear, and smoke lies low over goat paths. Reports speak of a smalla broken in a rush, of tents and books scattered like birds startled at dusk, of a long pursuit that ends with a surrender given to save lives that should never have needed saving. The quiet after these acts weighs more than drums. You meet new regiments that carry a look none had seen before. Zouaves step with a quick rhythm. Spahis ride with saddles that shine like lacquer under sun. Tunics flare with scarlet and blue, and the brass on their bridles catches noon like coins poured from a jar. The army gathers local skill and turns dress into emblem. Pain and pageant mix until memory separates them only with effort. On parade grounds, the image looks like victory. In fields, it often sounds like grief. You read a dispatch that folds law into rule and rule into habit. Settlers receive plots where olive groves once belonged to families whose names live in carved lintels. A town takes a French name and keeps its Arabic breath under the syllables. A school opens with the alphabet of Paris and a courtyard where children repeat lines that taste of both sea and desert. An ordinance promises equity and then carves exceptions that multiply. The ideology that later generations will call civilizing purpose begins to find words, yet the words rarely match the dust on the boots that write them. You return at dusk to Paris where lamps glow over bridges and newsboys call from corners. Algeria slips into café talk as if it were a far province of the same evening. Maps in schoolrooms show a white shape that grows each year like salt crystallizing along a shore. A painter brings back canvases filled with gold light and horsemen who move like reeds in wind. The hum leaves out the cry that never reaches the galleries. In private, old soldiers remember dunes that sing under moon and graves without markers beyond an oasis. You pause before a cabinet where treaties lie in neat stacks. Desmichels, then taffna, then scraps of paper that carry new boundaries like ropes thrown across water. The lines relax and tighten with the seasons. News arrives of a surrender given in 1847 by a leader who chooses life for his people over a death that would carry an easy halo. He will keep study and prayer in a distant house while his homeland learns the weight of a foreign calendar. The record does not decide whether a different policy in earlier years might have softened this arc. The open space in that thought remains. You stroll a Paris boulevard where trees lift their leaves into evening air. The citizen king tips his hat from a carriage. Children chase hoops. Newspapers argue politely about railways and tariffs. The empire that rises from these calm facades does not wear the word yet, but its presence can be felt in ports, in consulates, and in a white city across the sea where cannon already look outward like dogs at a gate. You sense a hinge about to turn. A single day in winter will sweep the umbrella away and call another name that prefers vision to compromise. You end near the Seine with the scent of rain on stone. Church bells and the muezzins' call seem to answer one another in your mind as if memory had braided them without effort. The years have taught the realm to live with two rhythms at once, one domestic and prudent, one maritime and restless. The first brings schools and contracts, the second brings uniforms that carry dust from another continent. The balance holds only for a moment. It is long enough to pass on to the next age a ledger full of promises and a question that keeps its seat at every table. What began with a fly whisk, with wheat, with honor, or with a wish to steady rule, does not close cleanly. The night settles and the river carries both city light and far-reflected stars.
You feel frost on bridges while a crowd studies posters that carry a new name with a familiar hecho. A winter of gatherings fills halls with hats set neatly beneath benches. A prince who learned politics in exile receives a mandate wide as the river at flood. The next year a coup moves with the quiet precision of printed orders and loyal regiments. The empire returns under a number rather than a lineage speech. Trumpets do not shout as much as the presses do. The coat of arms settles above doors that lead to ministries full of engineers, statisticians, and men who love plans more than pageants. You walk into an office where a prefect studies a map of Paris with rulers and blue pencils. Streets run like knots that catch carts and fire engines. The prefect speaks softly about air, light, and water. He also speaks about soldiers who must move quickly if need arises. A program begins that tears into walls as if opening a window after a long illness. Houses fall with a moan of old beams. Boulevards open like bright rivers. Chestnut trees sink roots along fresh curbs. Drains carry away the old sourness. A stone sewer flows like a silent machine beneath the feet of flaneurs who watch lamps bloom at dusk. Some will later call this a gift of health and beauty. Others will say the wide streets answer more to artillery than to strollers. The two readings walk side by side without settling into a single step. You stand under gaslight and read the names of new squares. The opera rises from a field of scaffolds with a stare that invites silk and satin to float down like pale birds. A market under iron ribs smells of coffee, citrus, and damp rope. A park opens where carriages once rattled around dusty lanes. Lakes mirror the sky. Boats shaped like toys slide across green water. Nurses push perambulators and gossip with a care that keeps the pace of the afternoon. You hear the murmur of a city that is learning to breathe with a measured grace. You enter a shop where the doorbell tinkles and counters shine with folded cloth. A new kind of house of trade speaks in prices that do not change between mouths. Goods are stacked for browsing rather than guarded like treasure. A manager explains refunds with the confidence of a priest explaining mercy. Women come to look as much as to buy. The crowd invents an urban pastime that feels like a gentle tide. The rhythm matches the sound of trains arriving at stations with roofs like steel meadows. The state builds lines that weld the provinces to the capital. Milk and stone, coal and song travel with a speed that weaves distances into habit. You travel east with infantry that wears a tidy look and carries rifles that breathe regular fire. The guns of Sevastopol pound a harbor where smoke sits like wool. The winter punishes both besiegers and besieged. Tents crack with frost. Ships bring bread, blankets, and news that smells of salt. The Allied camps learn to respect one another's stubbornness. When the city yields, a treaty is signed beside the sea and the Black Waters receive a new rule. The year of that peace writes itself into memory with precise numerals. The work feels like a counterweight to earlier humiliations, and Paris glows at night to celebrate what has been mended. You turn south toward a plain where poplars run in arrow straight lines. The names of two towns slide into speech with the wine of victory. Magenta keeps a taste of metal under the summer air. Solferina stains the sky in imaginations long after the bodies are buried. A visitor who walks the field not long after the fight dreams of a neutral emblem that will travel with surgeons into future storms. A map changes when the Empire of Austria loosens its grip on Lombardy. Another map changes when a treaty yields Savoy and Nice to France. Flags cross mountains quietly. The result enters the language of schoolbooks with a calm that hides the heat of its making. You stroll a fairground that flickers with lamps as if constellations had descended to the Champ de Mars. Sheaves of machines turn patiently for visitors who taste sugar, watch dynamos, and listen to foreign songs. Glass palaces glitter with small miracles of cloth and porcelain. The year stamps a metal that suns keep in drawers for decades. A city that once moved through narrow lanes now displays itself as a museum of motion, industry, and manners, and the court smiles because admiration so often softens criticism. You sit in a salon where a banker touches a globe and traces a line between two seas. A tall visitor from an old family of public servants speaks of a canal that will fold the world in two. The French tongue loves the elegance of the idea. A first stone is laid with speeches and music near shores that smell of brine and sun. Work begins with shovels, buckets, chains, and stubborn hope. The design carries both genius and miscalculation in the same coat. The full opening will come later and will still bear a French face on the ceremonies. In this decade, the dream itself is enough to kindle pride. You climb a gangplank in a harbor where heat presses on blue uniforms. Ships point their bows toward a coast that keeps light like the inside of a pearl. In Mexico City, the air smells of resin and cathedral dust. An archduke steps into a palace with balconies that watch eagles hunt over mountains. He believes that law will grow like a young tree if trimmed with care. He trusts that a crown can set roots where a republic has already learned to stand. Letters home carry optimism that lives beside omens written in the tight lines of ledgers. As months become years, the money box grows thin and the local tide grows strong. The final scene writes itself under a wall in the hard sun of a high plateau. The emperor who arrived with ceremony leaves as a husband wrapped in whispers and a date that enters songs of sorrow. The reasons that carried the venture across the ocean will never gather under one roof. Some will point to bonds and ports. Others will point to faith in order. Others will say a romantic habit mistook mirage for oasis. The orphan questions remain like birds circling a quiet hill. You return to the boulevards where trees lift a pleasant shade. Carriages roll beneath facades that all carry the same cornice line as if the city had finally agreed on a face. The police walk with a brisk step and a smile that offers order without malice. Newspapers test the edges of tolerance and sometimes find them. The ruler who prefers vision hosts scholars, painters, and inventors and invites Europe to see Paris at her best. Under the polish lies a hum of unease. Prices rise and fall with a rhythm too quick for wages. Workers complain of bread and rent. A taste for grandeur crowds a ledger that must answer to rain and harvest. You pass a studio where a painter dabs light on a cafe at night. Another captures dancers caught mid-turn like leaves in a swirl. A singer with a bright throat fills a new hall while chandeliers turn the air to a haze. The city becomes a theater where every face seems to watch and to be watched. At the edges, brick rows creep outward to neighborhoods that carry fresh plaster and raw hope. The train whistles on winter mornings and the fog smells faintly of coal. New men rise through schools and ministries. Women gather causes in parlors where teacups knock like small bells. You feel the empire tighten its grip on the reins and then loosen them as if the hand itself were uncertain. A promise of liberty lifts for a season. Speeches grow a little bolder. Then events on the frontier darken the horizon. A feud among princes in a German court rolls outward like circles from a stone thrown into a lake. The court in Paris studies telegrams and maps covered with pins. A word for honor begins to appear more often than the word for prudence. The boulevard trees whisper in a wind that lifts before a storm. You end at twilight near the freshly cut arc of a grand avenue where lamps open one by one. The opera stands unfinished with scaffolds like ribs against a purple sky. Children run in new parks and lick sugar from fingers. Policemen chat with flower sellers. A balloon drifts above the rooftops like a bright thought. The city that learned to widen its lungs and measure its light weights for news from the east. Victories have warm salons and monuments. A distant expedition has left a taste that does not leave the tongue. The next chapter draws near with the sound of boots on gravel and the squeal of axles at a frontier station. You breathe the evening and feel the fragile poise of a world that has just taught itself elegance and will soon test whether elegance can endure weight.
You stand on a station platform where steam settles on caps and collars and the smell of coal clings to wool. A bugle sounds from a street that runs past a baker's door. Cornflowers pinned to tunics like small pieces of sky. The trains pull out in regular beats that feel like a drum beneath your shoes. By September, the Marne lifts its muddy banks while taxis hurry along roads that taste of dust and courage. The city breathes again. The front hardens. Fields turn to furrows of wire and chalk. Letters travel with crumbs of soil inside their folds. Tin cups clink against trench boards. A rosary rests in a pocket near a ration of bread. The word Verdun begins to carry a weight that presses even when you sleep, and the months of that fight stretch until seasons lose their names. You walk the line of graves where wooden crosses first stand and then give way to stone. The blue of the cornflower becomes a sign that schoolchildren recognize without needing words. Bells count the 11th hour of the 11th day and the air changes. Men who learn to mend boots in shell holes come home to shop windows and to silence at tables where voices do not return. Villages lay wreaths under names carved with careful hands. A widow presses a forehead to cold granite and breathes once more before turning to the work of the afternoon. You move through years that rebuild with discipline and thrift. The Maginot Forts sink into earth like patient animals that watch in every direction. In Montparnasse, a saxophone leans into the night while a painter sets new colors on a cafe wall. Schoolbooks teach geometry with clean lines. The memory of the trenches remains close to the skin and keeps manners modest even when a dance picks up speed. A question avoids rest inside official speeches. It concerns how that first storm gathered. The answer never settles on one cause and stays instead as a braid of decisions, pride, fear, hope, and misread signals that cannot be pulled apart without breaking. You feel roads shiver again when armor crosses borders at dawn. Columns of families move south with mattresses tied to carts. A small carriage on a forest siding holds a table where pens scratch across paper while uniforms stand at a distance. A government takes its seat by the sea and writes laws that touch even the dress of schoolchildren. Ration cards stack in drawers beside soap that crumbles in the hand. Loudspeakers speak of order. A gray market grows behind shutters. At a winter rink, a child skates in a coat made from an old blanket and does not complain. Memory keeps another scene in Paris where uniforms file into a stadium and a roundup leaves a bruise that never fades. The measure of who knew and who chose remains a thought without a final answer, and the city learns how heavy a doubt can be when it stays for years. You climb a staircase where a set of headphones waits on a desk beside a microphone. A voice from London carries the shape of a cross with 2 bars and asks a nation to keep its feet steady. You pass a barn where a small press hides under straw and prints papers that smell of oil and hope. In a mountain wood, a notebook records supply drops and promises written with plain names. A scarf with a simple pattern becomes a message at a street corner. A boy on a bicycle memorizes a time and a bridge and rides as if the road were a quiet river. Behind closed doors, people choose how to stand inside a storm, and those choices mark their sleep for the rest of their days. You return to the coast when the summer lifts a wind that smells of salt and iron. Ships fill the horizon. The water shivers with the work of chains and ramps. Names fix themselves along a shore of hedges and stone walls. In Paris, the bells that once hid their voices ring without fear. Flags lean into sun from every balcony. Tanks roll under trees that keep a light dust on their leaves. A nurse ties a ribbon in a child's hair while a camera catches the smile. On an August afternoon, the city hears its own heart and understands that a long-held breath has finally left the chest. You walk through rooms where a new calendar begins in careful ink. Factories hum. A plan asks for steel, coal, and rail in measured quantities. A small car rattles along country roads and teaches families that market day can include laughter again. The empire that once felt like a distant crown begins to speak with voices that ask for their own calendars and their own schools. Tunisia and Morocco set their flags on staffs in the middle of the decade, and a chapter closes with handshakes that carry both relief and sorrow. In West Africa, the year of many births arrives with ceremonies of drums and tricolor farewells that share the same square without bitterness. The map on a classroom wall learns a new set of lines. You follow rain along a red road where rubber trees set their shadows in neat rows. A fort on a northern river bends to a plan that promises a trap and then becomes a basin of fire. Parachutes open like white flowers that never touch the ground. The valley at Dien Bien Phu writes its date in a way that does not need a second telling. May 7 arrives and a last message crosses the air with a voice that remains level. In Geneva, paper cools a fever without curing every ache. Families who have never seen snow read new names for their towns and begin to measure distance by train rather than by river. You listen in Algiers, where the call to prayer lifts above a square and then fades under traffic. A short leaf passes between hands in a cafe. The night of All Saints marks a turn. The countryside learns how silence holds news and how a stone bridge can carry danger in its curve. In the Casbah, footsteps echo at noon when soldiers knock on doors and notebooks fill with names. A battle inside a city teaches every wall to remember. Curfews press on faces. Methods used in the name of security leave marks that do not wash away when rain comes. Reports reach the capital with numbers that never agree. The story of Sétif keeps its dates and cannot keep a single total. The scale of sorrow remains a field where witnesses speak with honesty and still cannot match. You feel Paris grow sharp at the edges while the chamber learns that votes can shake streets. A general waits at his desk with papers that carry a different shape of government and a promise to close the distance between decision and need. Soldiers in the desert listen to the same radio and wonder how many seasons of duty remain. Families in Constantine and Oran sit on packed trunks that do not open for weeks. In ports across the sea, white steam lifts like sighs as gangways lower. The faces on the decks carry salt in their hair and keys in their pockets that no locks will accept again. A language that arrived with soldiers begins to live in new quarters of Marseille and Lyon, while a cuisine of semolina and cinnamon meets bread that peels into pale petals. You return to memorials that now hold names from 2 wars. A cornflower is tucked beside a wreath each November. A small cross of Lorraine hangs on a lapel at a funeral where uniformed men salute with quiet eyes. Schoolchildren trace routes on maps of Europe and then trace other routes across oceans where their grandparents were born. The empire that once filled calendars and budgets loosens into a set of friendships and arguments that continue at tables in cafes and in living rooms where cousins compare stories of fields near Verdun and alleys near the harbor in Algiers. You end on a bridge where the Seine folds the sky into slow ripples. The lamps wake one by one and the city's breath calms. A barge slips under an arch with sacks of flour stacked to the height of a man. On the bank an old soldier rests his hand on the rail and closes his eyes for a moment. The realm has crossed fire and hunger. It has learned to measure its strength not only by banners but also by its ability to listen to wounds without turning away. The next morning will bring a new constitution and a voice on the radio that asks a weary country to stand straighter than before. The night answers with a quiet that feels like trust. You wake to cannon fog pressed low over autumn fields. Rails shine like wet slate. A rumor runs ahead of couriers and turns to certainty by noon. The army that carried eagles has folded and the city chooses a new word for itself. Republic. You feel the syllables settle like stones on a riverbed. Balloons rise from Paris with sacks of letters. Horses pull bread carts over frost. In the night shells pass like red bees. Winter tightens. When the gates open at last, another fire lights inside the walls. Workshops turn to fortresses. Bridges shoulder timbers. Red cloth climbs masts above barricades. For weeks the city speaks in a fierce whisper while bells count hours of courage and rage. The final days come with smoke, gravel dust, and footsteps that never seem to end. Some houses keep burn marks near their eaves. The story refuses one shape. To a few, the commune feels like a last defense of dignity. To others, a fever that could have consumed everything. The streets hold both memories without choosing. You walk under a pale sky as a new government learns to breathe. Deputies take seats on benches that still smell of fresh wood. A man with a quick voice argues for schools that belong to the nation rather than to any altar. Chalk dust lifts in classrooms where maps hang with bright borders and children copy clean letters on slates. The Jules Ferry laws of 1881 and 1882 open doors to free, compulsory, secular lessons. Ink stains fingers like blue violets. On a shelf, a small bust of a woman in a Phrygian cap watches with a steady gaze. Marianne becomes a neighbor more than a statue. You cross the Champ de Mars while a forest of scaffolds rattles in wind. Rivets ring like small bells. Iron rises in lace that seems too slender to stand. The year is 1889. A tower climbs above Paris and casts a long evening shadow over roofs the color of pigeons. Some cover their eyes. Others laugh and point. By night the structure glows like a charcoal drawing traced with moonlight. The fair buzzes with engines and pastry. A century since a stormed fortress is marked with metal rather than stone. The choice collects praise and scorn and never decides which it deserves more. You ride a new train beneath a roof of glass and iron. Stations breathe a soft coal smell. Gamarred entrances lift their green stems over the mouths of tunnels. The city hums with confidence. Cafes fill with tobacco and talk. Painters catch dancers mid-turn in amber light. Singers shake crystal from chandeliers with one high note. A newspaper folds on a zinc counter with stories from Cairo, Dakar, Saigon. The world feels closer than it did only a season ago. You step into a ministry where maps open like fans across a table. Lines run through deserts, jungles, and deltas. The words on the walls say protection, treaty, survey, mission. The smell of gum Arabic and damp paper lingers. Ships bring officers who wear linen by day and white dress by night. In Tunisia, a treaty signed in 1881 draws a veil of tutelage over a bey who still keeps some ceremonials. In Madagascar, the year 1895 writes itself into the ledger beside a crown that bends under a foreign schedule. On the Nile at Fashoda in 1898, two flags face one another above mud and water. Voices remain formal. After weeks, one flag lowers with courtesy, and an old rivalry turns toward a different kind of friendship. The exact weight of pride and prudence at that junction lives in a balance that scholars still touch with care. You follow a steamer up a green river that carries red soil in slow coils. At a post with a whitewashed wall, a civil servant stamps passports and a teacher unpacks primers. Children recite in a language that smells of chalk and sea wind rather than of millet and rain. Behind the school, a rubber grove darkens the afternoon. The code called Indigenat tightens rules for subjects without giving them the same voice that citizens enjoy. Papers speak of a civilizing purpose. Diaries speak of quotas, shortages, and fever. In a courtyard, an interpreter hesitates between two words and chooses the gentler one out of mercy. The argument between assimilation and association never resolves completely. The air of the port carries both coffee and misgiving. You reach Tonkin and hear peddlers crying fruit names under tamarind. Hanoi wears a grid of boulevards and shutters. Saigon smells of pepper and river mud. By 1887, an entity named for Indochina gathers lands under a single umbrella of budgets and governors. In Laos, the river runs like a slow drumbeat between limestone hills. In Cambodia, dancers turn wrists like opening flowers. In Annam, mandarins sit for exams that now include questions about a distant republic. The tricolor reflects in rice paddies. The reflection breaks when a water buffalo moves. You walk a boulevard in Paris where a newsboy waves a sheet with block letters that swallow the masthead. A captain is stripped of rank in a courtyard where boots scrape in unison. A note, a list, a name, a secret room, a rumor. Faces harden. Families choose sides at dinner. A novelist writes an open charge that thunders like summer rain. Years pass while papers yellow in drawers and then are opened again. In the end, the verdict reverses and the man returns with honor. The Dreyfus affair becomes more than a case. It becomes a mirror in which the Republic studies its own courage and its own fear. Even with the record now clear, the reason for the long refusal to see remains a knot touched again and again without undoing. You enter a classroom after that bitter season and see the cross gone from the wall. A clock keeps the hour. A bust of Marianne looks slightly left with a confident smile. The teacher opens a reader on civic duty and rights. In the year 1905, the law of separation takes its seat. Churches keep worship without state pay. The state keeps schools without catechism. The rule writes itself in calm prose and then must be lived in rooms where feeling runs ahead of paragraphs. The settlement proves hard and also durable. Choirs continue to sing. Town halls continue to marry. Neighbors continue to borrow sugar. You stroll an exposition again in 1900 when the Seine wears necklaces of light. A moving sidewalk hums. New bridges step over the river like swans. Electricity makes the night seem gentle. A visitor touches a switch and grins like a child. Another fair blooms in 1931 with pavilions of palm and bamboo that fold many worlds into a single park. Crowds taste spices and applaud parades. Beyond the fences, lives shaped by rule and extraction run on different clocks. The distance between display and daily bread never closes entirely. You sit with officers who write about legions in columns and debate whether storms can be soothed with roads, schools, and clinics as readily as with punishments. Reports pile up with words like pacification and revolt. Lines of railway stitch together coasts and savannas. A governor drafts a grand federation for West Africa with a tidy budget and too few nurses. The civil calendar advances. The old calendars do not disappear. Market days continue to flow according to moon and river rather than office ink. You wander a museum where a mural sets Marianne among farmers, scholars, and workers. She holds a branch of olive. A child stares at her calm face and then at the iron tower that blinks through the window in winter haze. The Republic feels old enough to trust itself and young enough to change without breaking. Trains run on time more often than not. Letters cross oceans and return with stamps like small paintings. Cafes breathe with warmth under awnings striped in cream and green. You pause at a frontier where a mountain road falls toward a broad plain. Alliances stack like cordwood. Newspapers publish diagrams of treaty chains. In Morocco, a protectorate is declared in 1912 and a sultan signs with a hand that trembles slightly under the gaze of foreign suits. The harbor smells of sardines and gasoline. Riders on the inland plateaus read the news weeks later. The empire reaches wide while the homeland grows convinced that reason and caution can keep balance. You end on a summer evening when cafe chairs scrape faintly and the sky keeps its light longer than seems possible. The Republic has taught children to read without fear. It has sent priests and police to different rooms with a handshake rather than a shove. It has stretched itself across oceans on the promise of uplift and the pull of trade. It has also learned to carry arguments it cannot finish. The tricolor moves in a soft breeze above a square where a band plays a march that sounds friendly. Deep in that calm, telegraph keys tick a message from the east. The century that learned elegance and discipline feels a new pressure in its chest. Lanterns glow along the river and you listen to water keep time for a city that is about to count a different rhythm. You wake to a voice on the radio that carries resolve without haste. A new text lies ready on desks across the country. The Constitution of 1958 takes its seat and gives the presidency a steadier hand than the chamber alone could supply. You feel the House of State stand taller. Ministers learn to speak in clean lines. Prefects measure floods and roads. The tricolor reads its own colors with fresh patience. The question of how much power should live in one figure remains like a lamp left low in a hallway. You walk a corridor where maps of the Sahara hang beside charts of law. Papers pass that end a long war. The year is 1962 and the Accords of Evian send a signature across water. Ferries crowd with families who carry keys that will never fit new doors. In the Casbah, lamps burn late with relief and grief together. Back in the capital, the vote changes how the head of state is chosen. A people will now mark the name directly. The choice feels simple and heavy at once, and it becomes the new rhythm of national life. You step onto cobbles that remember spring. Students climb statues with wreaths of leaves. Workers pour from gates and join them like rivers finding one channel. Posters paste over other posters. A slogan dries in the sun and flakes by evening. The month is May and the year is 68. The air seems to ask whether obedience can make room for joy. Bargains are struck that raise pay and shorten hours. Trains start again. The mood settles without agreeing on what changed most. Some say the future opened. Some say families tightened their own bonds in answer. The ground keeps both stories without resentment. You move through a test site that now lies quiet under clear stars. A mushroom of memory floats far above and then thins into wind. The nation builds a force that promises never to beg for safety. Submarines leave harbors at dawn. The decision brings reassurance and also an ache that returns whenever waves of sorrow reach Polynesian shores. In the same decades, a silver bird lifts from a runway and draws a white line across sky that tastes like thunder. Engineers shape a fast train that hums over new rails. You ride the TGV and watch poplars bend in a ribbon of speed. The country learns to trust both caution and daring at the same time. You join a night crowd in front of the National Assembly when a new president stands on a balcony and lifts a red rose. The date is 1981. A minister signs the end of the death penalty and the signature feels like a window opened after a long rain. Factories enter the care of the state and later return to markets that ask for leaner accounts. The pendulum learns a slower swing. A museum of pipes and escalators shows its organs to the street. A glass pyramid rises where kings once slept. High culture and street voices speak to one another with more ease than before. You hold a coin that gleams with a different map. The treaty that binds Europe more closely takes effect. Maastricht becomes a word that children learn before they understand its full reach. By 2002, the euro clinks in pockets and tills. A waiter counts change in a currency that crosses borders without a pause. Pride and worry share a table in kitchens where rent, milk, and hope are measured. Some say a continent has built a harbor against storms. Others say the harbor asks ships to lower sails too far from home. The thought remains open like a door that never clicks shut. You stand at an opening session of a summit where many flags lift in quiet air. Francophone voices gather to trade poems and policy. A singer from the Sahel warms the hall. A teacher from Quebec tells a joke that travels well. The organization gains offices and scholarships, and yet the pulse of the French language lives most fiercely in schoolyards and kitchens far from Paris, where it rubs against Wolof, Arabic, Creole, and Kinyarwanda. Whether this family grows best by adopting one home or by keeping many hearths remains a question asked with affection more than argument. You walk market streets in La Réunion where vanilla scents the morning and Creole phrases hop between stalls. In Martinique, drums test the first light. In Guadeloupe, rain jumps from palm to tin roof and calms as quickly as it came. In Cayenne, the river runs brown and deep under a sky that carries parrots at dusk. In New Caledonia, you hear a quiet campaign that asks voters to speak their hearts. Ballots in 2018 and 2020 and again in 2021 count futures with care. The result seals status for now and still leaves a hum beneath the day. Self and family, reef and republic, each keeps a claim that refuses to grow thin. You step into a lycée courtyard at recess. Laughter rises after a lesson on laïcité that tries to hold both freedom and peace in one palm. The pact asks that the state keep prayer at arm's length while guarding the right to pray at home and in sanctuaries. The classroom lives with the weight of that promise. Simple objects draw attention that feels larger than their size. The balance is adjusted again and again by principals, parents, judges, and the teenagers themselves. No single rule resolves what children carry from their grandparents to their friends without losing warmth. You pause on a square where candles make a soft galaxy after a terrible night. Strangers share tea from thermoses and stand without speaking. Later you hear boots on gravel as yellow vests gather at roundabouts and talk about diesel, wages, and respect. You watch flames lick a cathedral roof and then see a forest of scaffolds rise in answer. At other moments you follow climate marches under plane trees and see small hands carry cardboard planets drawn in bright pencil. The Republic keeps its heart open to grief and argument and pride all in the same year. You stroll along the Seine in a summer that hangs flags on every bridge. Athletes pass like arrows of color. The city remembers how to welcome the world. Banners reflect in water and break into gentle shards when boats slip by. Later, the river goes back to barges that carry flour and gravel under dawn mist. Markets lift their shutters. The baker scores the same chevron on the loaf his grandfather learned. A radio plays a rap in rapid French while a neighbor hums a chanson older than both of them. The sound becomes a braid. You enter an embassy where a consul stamps a passport for a woman who will teach in a mountain town in the Atlas or near a school on the Mekong. You visit a startup incubator where young coders joke in 3 languages before lunch. You sit in a farm kitchen where a beekeeper stirs chestnut honey and talks about drought and blossoms. The country lives between screens and soil. It defends hedges that keep birds safe and wires that keep thought moving. It sends soldiers to keep promises and doctors to keep children alive where storms have taken roofs. The flag finds both uses without losing color. You end on a hill above the capital where linden trees shift in a round wind. The 5 points of the star that are liberty, equality, fraternity, dignity, and memory shine faintly as evening comes. Whether the future of this wide family lies more in a Europe that deepens, or in a sea of French-speaking cities that share law and art, or in a steadiness at home that refuses to leave anyone behind, the choice stays open like a well. You hold the silence and feel how the empire has become something less about borders and more about a language that can carry lullabies and laws with equal grace. Night lights appear along the river and the nation rests as a living conversation that does not end. Night lowers itself over rooftops and river, smoothing corners into kindness and turning stone to velvet. The traffic thins, the bridges hum with only the quiet weight of their own arches, and the water keeps a slow promise to the sea. Gardens that watched emperors and workmen alike grow still under soft lamps. Linden leaves trade whispers that sound like distant rain. In small kitchens, cups cool on saucers. In distant fields, hay breathes in neat rows it has kept since noon. Old roads close their eyes. Roman stones, Frankish mounds, Gothic ribs, and the straight were lines of later ages all relax into one broad comfort, as if the land itself were a great hand that blesses. The banners of every century fold and rest in the same dark, so that no color must shout to be remembered. Choirs that once lifted roofs now rest as a faint echo inside the chest. A bell far away shapes one last note and lets it settle like a feather. Somewhere a library lamp glows over a page that will wait until morning. Somewhere a harbor lets lines slacken against pilings, and the hulls tap gently like a clock that chooses mercy. In a town on another ocean, French words drift through shutters and settle on a cradle. The wide family of voices breathes together, even when miles and stories spread between them. The night gathers every thread and lays them down without knot or hurry. You let your shoulders loosen. You let your jaw forget the day. The long line of history softens into a path of lanterns, each one a face, a song, a promise kept. Warmth moves from the heart into the hands and back again, slow and regular. The window becomes a mirror of quiet and the mirror becomes a window of dream. And now, you may drift into dreams of history. End of script. Sweet dreams.